Hey everyone. This is really exciting. I haven't been to South by Southwest in years, and it's so good to be back.
Hello, yeah, great to be here.
JV, why don't you tell me about yourself, a little introduction?
Yeah, well, thanks, Jay Chris. So my name's John, JV. I work at Protocol Labs on NFT storage and Web3 storage. I lead a lot of our BD work, especially around how do we make NFTs more resilient by storing them on IPFS and Filecoin. Maybe to return the favor.
So I'm Chris Anderson, J. Chris. I've been doing startups and peer-to-peer data and applications for like more than a decade. My love of empowering users is what got me here. I work on NFT storage on our product, and for me, the big thing that excites me, that wakes me up every morning to like turn the knob to make it better, is creating products that are going to make developers' lives easier and make it super exciting to like get into this new ecosystem, and then like beyond that, coordinate our efforts so that people build higher quality software and people who are using and buying and trading and excited about NFTs, have the experience that we'd all like them to have.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, maybe to get into it, so I think for this discussion, we wanted to talk a little bit about like the evolution of NFTs, where we think they're going. But maybe just to start, I'd love to hear if you have any retrospective thoughts on like how did we get here? Where do you think we've been?
Okay, so this is one of those, it doesn't happen very often in tech or any other new breakout like cultural thing, but it's one of those deals where people are picking up NFTs, they're adopting them, the culture is like outpacing the infrastructure. So then people like me and the engineers I work with are trying as hard as we can to keep up, and I mean it's super fun. People talk about like that's where you want to be as a startup, but with that quick growth comes, the kind of cracks in the facade as the tech isn't quite ready yet, and then that like leads to backlash as people, lose things that were valuable to them or whatever. So all those concerns are really top of mind for us at NFT Storage because, people are making NFTs and like I guess we're selling the shovels, and so we want those to be really good and create high quality software. And you shouldn't have to be an expert to make it.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. I think I saw a tweet from OpenSea the other day about how with NFTs, we now have more NFTs like at this period than like websites did when Google launched. And so there's this interesting like analogy of like the engineering scale challenges. If you're trying to build something that's just like, how do I even know what are all the NFTs that are out there? We're now like hitting actually like really interesting internet scale questions, which are like non-trivial to solve. I guess I'm curious for like maybe if you have any thoughts or reflections here as well. So like NFTs like been around for a little bit at least, but really like burst into the scene like over the last year and some change. And so I'm curious if you have any reflections, even just thinking about previous tech trends, if there's any parallels you see between like maybe the .com era and NFTs, anything there that maybe is like instructive of how we might think about how the space might evolve.
Well, Tim O'Reilly said that you wouldn't really get the web to be interesting until after a crash. And I think that may be true here. Most NFTs, like we just talked about, there's millions of them. They're turning into a web scale challenge. That's not millions of Bored Apes selling for 40 ETH a pop. That's millions of NFTs that are selling for a gas price, if that. And I think eventually our perception of the space will flip to where we realize most NFTs are those ones that are valuable only in aggregate. They're not worth $100,000. They're worth the energy it took to create them maybe. But they're going to be so interesting when economics allows people to experiment with that because they track where they've come from. And two NFTs could look the same, but this one had an interesting journey to get here and this one didn't, and so this one's more interesting. And the fact that software can be built around people's tastes with regard to what's interesting, I think that's pretty neat to make a market in that. It's for me, it's like kind of an antidote to the crypto finance world. It's all the cultural people who are coming in.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that sort of strikes me is like there was a period in the .com era where it was like these are .coms, and that's like the interesting feature. And now the way that we think about tech, there's like health tech, fintech, whatever. It's like sub-segmented and people think about them in distinct ways. And I wonder if that's like a direction NFTs are going to potentially go in. And I think that may be a question about like some of the technical improvements, where today there's a bunch of limitations on the infrastructure side. The things that we're sort of limited to are like how do we create NFTs that can like justify some of the input costs that go into it? And so we're like working with a subset of what NFTs potentially even could be. So I'm curious to see how that potentially evolves.
Right? Okay, so if they are these ordinary objects, like if NFTs become the way that we just do normal stuff on the daily basis, people talking about NFTs would be like if you and I were sitting up here talking about objects, like objects are so neat, they have like extension and mass and they persist through time. Like, no, we don't talk about that because we're used to it, right? So like NFTs are going to be a thing we don't talk about because we're used to them. And I think that's where their value is really going to show.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting if we think about like other technology, even like paper, like way back in the day, having a book was like a really big deal. Like having a library was like this unique feature only the richest people had. And now it's like super commonplace. There's a bunch of books right over there.
We used to be really into URLs, right? It used to be like, this URL is an RSS URL. I'm so cool. Now, nobody really talks about them like that. Again, I think that's going to be the transition we go through. And when we're on the other side of it, we'll get to see, or rather, when we're on the other side of it, people who aren't really paying attention now are going to be like, oh, these NFT things, those are normal.
Well, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on like what stops us going. So especially now, I think there's like a little bit, it's in the culture, it's in the zeitgeist, the fact that we're having this conversation right now. What stops us from actually getting to the world where it's actually not interesting because it's an NFT? It's just like a way of doing something like digitally. Like how does it actually get to that end state that we're sort of talking about?
Like baby steps, like the first person, who it's probably already happened, right? Vitalik's dream finally coming true of getting to buy a game object in this game and sell it in another game. So as people are doing that, then they're not going to care that it's an NFT. They're going to care that they were able to, connect with the people in that other game, or like, reform their WoW guild over in this other game or whatever. I think that's where it'll show up, and then it'll be the things we can build now that we couldn't build before, and that's all speculative, and that's what this audience is for.
Do you have any thoughts on, just even from a practical side, I know there's like, so, I mean, we've talked a lot about how do we make the storage side easier. I think there's the other aspect, which is just even for average people, I think about my parents and like when they get their first NFT, how do we make sure that that is a safe and secure experience for them? Do you have any thoughts on like how that side of the world, like how do we build user experience from like the full end-to-end flow, not just like the developer flow?
It's the kind of thing where the competitive landscape isn't necessarily going to build the thing we're wishing for. Like, I would love for us to build like self-custody wallets that are consumer friendly for people who don't care whether or not they're KYC'd on that wallet. But like, I doubt that's going to happen. It's probably going to look like there becomes the Coinbase for NFTs, or OpenSea takes up the wallet side, and someone's going to smooth over all the rough edges, and it'll be a consumer product with like a registry.com, and maybe some people will think it's cool that you could go to a different registry and get the same result. But that doesn't mean there's not value for all the self-custody and decentralized capabilities, because that's what allows us to build fractionalization and DeFi on top of NFTs. And that's what allows us to claim that they have value, right? No one's really get that excited about selling video game objects that are actually owned by the video game vendor. So I think self-custody is required for NFTs to be NFTs, even if almost nobody will end up using it.
I mean, yeah, when I think about Web3, a lot of it is just about, do we have the ability to exit? And whether you choose to like take that exit is something that is maybe like your personal choice, but without having the choice, then it's like not actually living up to like the basic principles. And I think even from like a user experience side, and maybe this can dovetail into a different question, of like, how do you think the world sort of evolves with the different chains that are like being built? We have people who are minting NFTs on Tezos, Ethereum, Solana, and obviously like even from like a technical level, that now makes it slightly complicated, where it's like you have 3 different wallets that are holding 3 different sets of NFTs. Do you have any thoughts on like how that might get better for users, how the future sort of evolves?
I always try to start with, what are the people who don't know and don't care? How are they going to interface with it? And this like very kind of like chains as religions thing seems like what happened was the culture absorbed what it meant to be like a Bitcoin maximalist, and then said, oh, I'll be that, but for over here, right? And so now we have like some folks who learn how to be like very specifically, pro a particular chain or another, and they're just kind of like enacting that script on these other chains, and it's a recipe for growth and good for them if they're in early. and whatnot, but I don't think that that's really a feature of the long-term commercialization or the making it consumer friendly. Cross-chain is going to become normal, and we're still like grasping in the dark for those metaphors of what does it mean to trade an NFT with somebody where the one you're getting is on a different chain from the one you're starting on. And technically we could solve all that, but how do you put that in users' hands in a way where they don't forget step 3 or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, the two things that sort of stick out to me, thing number one is someone's probably going to build a super wallet, which is like you can load up all the different things and somehow like be able to like interface across those and make that nicer. The other is maybe this is where the sub-segmentation of NFTs comes in, where it's like you may be not willing to move your Bored Ape or CryptoPunk across like outside of Ethereum or wherever just because there may be introduced risk. But if you're playing a game, maybe there's something that makes more sense in that frame. I'm curious, are there any specific use cases you can think of where like cross-chain NFTs seem like obviously like the right, like they will evolve in that way, where it's like...
I think it's necessary, again, for NFTs to be objects that we can buy and sell. Like it's a form of exit because the cross-chain connection allows you to do like DeFi and loans and more interesting things with those objects, even if then we bundle that up and hide it from the user. It's still what's happening, and so they need to be able to accomplish that. I don't know. Again, that we're talking about like what happens to the valuable NFTs, but if the interesting NFTs are the ones that are like trading closer to gas price, those are going to be in-game objects that may only be interesting in aggregate, or maybe even game characters. So there's, a lot of, anytime you've got something where it's history is what distinguishes it, it's the right thing to model with an NFT.
Yeah. I guess that also leads to another interesting question of other infrastructure, where it's like if you move things across chains, how do you actually maintain that provenance and be able to say like this is the history of that object from like when it was an ETH land to Solana land or whatever else?
Right. Yeah, and that's going to depend on people like caring viscerally about the history. If it turns out that I'm wrong and nobody cares about that, then those probably get dropped on the floor. Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm curious, are there any specific predictions you have, like any crazy ones about like what's the left field thing that maybe happens with NFTs in the next, I won't even cap it at year, maybe let's say like 5 to 10 years?
It's super hard for me to think in such a short term, like 5 to 10 years out. I'm like farther out.
That's the short term. I was going to say like in the next year.
Okay, you're making let me just think. Like, I've got a buddy who's an environmental conservationist, and what he does is he uses machine learning to detect tiger sharks in the background of YouTube videos that tourists post from their scuba adventures. And he's not just like using them to say like, oh, St. Bart's had lots of tiger sharks. He's saying like Bob the tiger shark went to that island on that day, and then he was on that island on that day. And so the same software, now they're adapting it for like other charismatic megafauna, giraffes and whatnot. And so if this giraffe can be tracked in a passive way, then we can make it into an NFT, and people can sponsor that giraffe or that eagle. And then when like the eagle, goes hunting and grabs a salmon or something, that's going to be that NFT. Maybe like eats the NFT that corresponded to the salmon, right? And if you think that line out, I think it allows all sorts of objects or things that we treat as objects in the past to be treated as agents in the future, and have people root for them. You could be on Team Salmon or Team Eagle, or things that are crazier than wildlife conservation via video games, but tracking objects and their interactions over time with skin in the game. I think that's what we'll see in 5-10 years.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, two of the use cases I sort of think about is just like what are NFT, or like what are different ways of thinking about what an NFT actually captures, where it could also just be like an NFT is like an assertion, where it's like if you want to say like John said something about Chris, and here's some metadata around that. Like an NFT is actually that as well. And so when we think about like certifications of like who is like giving you like your university degree or like high school diploma, but it could be a bunch of other things as well. It's like who is like validly able to participate in a specific thing, whether that's saying like you've met some sort of certification, you are ESG compliant in a specific way. I think it becomes this like common substrate where you can have information just like live on this like open ledger. The other way is like the digital object side of it, where I guess before NFTs and like really crypto in general, did we ever have digital bearer objects where it's like, here's a thing where you walk up to a website on the web and bring data with you? And then that just kind of opens an aperture for like a bunch of other rails that can't really exist today. Even inside of like finance, I think about like bonds and like, could every like corporate bond be an NFT? And like that then just like forwards payments to whoever the holder is. They can like fractionalize it, send it to other people. Really feels like we've like underexplored all the different ways that this could go.
Totally. To go back to your certifications example, I think it's absolutely true. You've got like proof of attendance protocol and the online achievement tokens and a bunch of things in that vein. The way I like to imagine the value coming from is like we're already tracking my AWS Solutions Architect certification. Like I don't really have a problem with that being tracked, but if NFTs can lower the friction for that kind of interaction, then the attendance NFT for today or for like a random meetup on a Tuesday night in a small tech market, right? Like with a presenter who has middling credentials, doesn't matter. Like that NFT is gold because that's who I want to hire is somebody who goes to all those like Tuesday night meetups and stuff. So it's in the aggregate when you get lots of information with a low friction that the NFTs are going to show like new value. Like they're good at doing the thing we already do, but they're so good at it we can do these new things.
I'm curious if you have any, so sort of building off of that, I'm curious if you have any thoughts about like the privacy implications. I think one way that we can get excited about all this information living on chain is that there is this like thing that becomes this immutable source of truth. I think an undervalued part of the real world is that you have the ability to like selectively represent to whoever you want. Like these are the experiences that I wish to share, where it's like I don't necessarily want to show the world like here's the POAP of every event I've gone to. Like there's things I may want to like in like private context reveal and public context reveal. Do you have any thoughts on like how that potentially gets improved? Are there ways that we can improve privacy on like the blockchain for that?
It's a tough problem because I think that doing the blockchain to be the most blockchainy blockchain is at odds with being the most private. And so zero knowledge proofs will go a long way, but like building a Merkle tree on zero knowledge proofs is different from the Merkle trees we do today. If I could like selectively blind 90% of the bits in my profile, for most users, that would be wonderful, but I don't know if we're there yet, and I think we won't get the motivation to do all that research until, we might have like some, big event that makes us, some black swan tells us that we should have been more careful with our chains.
I mean, I think, not to pick a super topical one, but I think like there was that potential of like Ukraine doing an NFT drop. I think it's actually really interesting because it's like one of the first, almost by definition has to be the first time this has really happened. But I think it opens this really interesting question of like 10 years from now, there will be a ledger of like who donated to these things. And so I think it really is speaking to like privacy does matter, especially when you start thinking like political context of like what do people want to support, but not necessarily reveal to like the world, or it's like their choice that they want to be able to reveal that to the world.
And let's just go with an example of, first of all, NFTs are so different from like fund flows in the way we think about them, and now we're running them on the same rails. So that's but like NFTs you want to claim, it's like, or at least maybe you have an online persona that wants to claim it. You want to like pin those NFTs to an identity, and finance may be different. So we're going to need to think about, what those online profiles mean to us. I think it's really got to happen like in the hearts and minds. It's less than of a tech question.
Yeah. Well, that I guess maybe goes to this other question I have, which is I think today you get like a pretty strong bifurcation in how people think about NFTs. I think there's a lot of folks who get really excited about the promise of what these tools can do, even just as like a funding mechanism. And then you get the other half, which is probably an amalgamation of like a bunch of different concerns. Some of them are like environmental concerns. Some of them are just about like, are NFTs just scams? And to be fair to some of those criticisms, I think on like the scam side, there's definitely people who do run scams. And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how does the space change? Like how does public perception sort of get to that point where this is like just acknowledged for the thing that it is? It's like an object, like a digital object. how do we move past sort of like, I feel like the stage that we're currently at where people sort of talk past each other?
Okay, there's an open question. I don't know the answer. Nobody knows the answer. I think it would have to be like the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that decides or whatever. But if I make an NFT that points to somebody else's artwork, and I'm very clear about that, like let's say I use the canonical URL for a Bored Ape and I make an NFT that points to that URL, is that copyright infringement, trademark infringement? What if I'm very clear that I made NFTs of my favorite bookmarks, and they're not supposed to be specialer than that? So if they are just digital objects, then doing that would be no problem as long as I'm clear about what I'm doing. If like the state or law or whatever wants to imbue that link with additional significance, that's probably what we'll learn in the courts in the next few years.
Yeah. Well, maybe to pause there with the questions I have, I'm curious if there's any questions folks have that they'd want to pose to maybe Chris or myself.
And if you're watching the live stream, you can tweet at us, and we might not answer right now, but we'll get back to you on Twitter.
I see an Angie hand.
So in terms of like, what do you want to see in the world of NFTs? Can you hear me? Sorry.
I'll repeat it out.
Sorry.
So the question is, what do we want to see in the world of NFTs?
Yeah, what would like really excite you? Obviously, we're seeing, and today we're going to hear from a lot of people who are kind of working now at what we would say is the fringe of NFTs. But you know, what kind of like creative use cases, and also human, like you kind of touched on human rights as well. Like, what kind of like in your dream scenario, like what's next? Like, where can we kind of put our efforts collectively, and where do you think we should be putting our efforts collectively as well?
There's the hard problems that we identified around privacy and identity. Like, I might be super proud to make this NFT tied to my identity when I'm a teenager and then not want to do that at all 25 years later. And if we solve that problem, we solve some of these other hard problems, I think, just guessing on how the technical mechanisms would work. So for me, that's a big one. Like, how can I... and I don't think that it's an easy one either. I think that it goes all the way to the way wallets and chains are organized, like we were talking about earlier. But until the culture like digests the fact that this wallet that you're messing with is not anonymous and like is a complete record of everything that you've done with it, people are gonna onboard into the crypto world, do all this stuff, and then be like, "Oops!" And so that's just gonna have to happen. And it's the people who learn that lesson are gonna start demanding the better products, and hopefully there will be enough of like the industry to meet that need and come up with something that might look very different.
Yeah, I sort of get vibes of like early social media where it was like people would put everything online, and then there was like a moment where people sort of flipped. They're like, wait a minute, is this really the thing I want to do? I think the thing that's slightly different is it's not like there is I'm going to go wipe all my stuff off of Facebook button. It's like, oh gosh, I can like try to like disassociate myself from this address, but that may still be there. And Angie's question, I think the things that I'm kind of excited for, and I would hope we see more of, is even more shorter term, is just like different ways of constructing NFTs. So I don't know if folks are familiar with like harbinger taxes, but just different ways that you can think about how does an NFT transfer and how can an NFT be used? So even just as like a funding model to say, we want to create consistent revenue streams that then can be used to say like, this NFT is like a proof of support for a specific cause. You can actually tell that it's like linked to that cause because it was issued from the right smart contract. But there's a way that it's not just like a one and done where you just donate once. There's a consistent funding stream that can come behind that. And then that can actually be channeled for like actual social good. And I think like NFTs is like a proof of donation is incredibly powerful. Even now with like Twitter and other tools that will like do integrations, which now you can link to show like verifiably this has happened. I think it's like one of the most interesting ways that like we can use the social coordination tools of crypto to help improve just the world writ large.
For sure. A very short-term question, right? Like, I want to find real-world use cases, not that they don't exist, but like there's other ones we haven't messed with for transferable membership. Like a lot of these NFTs get used to make me part of a club, and then I can sell it to somebody else, and I'm not part of that club anymore. Just seems like there's more we can do with that.
Yeah, totally agree. I think this is one of the interesting ideas of like things that we typically think are like one and dones, can you like have recapturable value where it's whether it's like a membership into like Soho House or something else or like restaurants or whatever. The idea that you can like buy in, resell, I think you're totally right. Hopefully we'll see more of that because I think it also reclaims in a form, just like what is our ability to like own stuff in the web.
Right.
I think it's funny that sort of as things have digitized more, we've moved to this model where people are like, oh, well, everything should sort of be rented, whether it's like your Spotify, like playlists or whatever else. And the real question is like, is that actually like the perfect balance, or was it that the digital world was easier in some forms, but like now there's like more of a spectrum that we want to bring back?
Right. Yeah, renting in the digital world is an artifact of centralization because you're going to go to that resource and it's either going to, allow or deny you to read the media. When you're on Web3, it's just a different world. You would use a different set of incentives.
Yeah. Cool. Sweet.
So you mentioned like the lower friction levels as far as NFTs being able to, I guess, depict or show. I thought I was projecting, but so like the NFTs being able to depict or show, like for say your college diploma or something like that, or your credentials, and like the frictionless action of that. I'm thinking like the legitimacy of the blockchain. Do you think that that will also kind of have some sort of influence on the progression of that? Because it's like, say we want to do something, but we can't do it on Ethereum because the gas prices are so high. So if we create a new blockchain to do that, there's always so much, oh, this is a new blockchain, this is a new wallet we got to get. Like, so what are some of the, I guess, like workarounds for something like that? Because it sounds dope, like being able to hire someone based off, oh, you went to that event and you studied here, you did that, and not having to worry about if they lied on their resume, So there's something I thought about when you said that. So.
Gas prices are too high, and a lot of people really want to solve that problem. So I'm hoping the market works it out, and then we can just like let it go. But your other part of the question is like one of the solutions is alternate chains, and each chain is kind of a socially constructed, pool of trust, and so that's going to be. Chains are going to have awareness the same way brands have awareness. If I've never heard of your chain, then I might not trust it. But I think people are going to get used to the mechanisms, right? Eventually, we might have like a thing where some chain turns out not to be trustworthy, but we haven't even seen that yet. So most of the time you say it's on a chain, people believe it. I anticipate it's going to stay that way, but there's going to be less and less room in people's heads for new chains.
I think there's also a little bit of a workaround, which is like, I don't think it has to be a binary. I think you can have a little bit of a spectrum here. So I think like imagine your university just says like, hey, this is our smart contract on like the ETH chain, on Polygon, wherever else. And then like if someone wants to verify a credential, they could go to any of those networks and they could just see that like, yes, it's been validly issued by the right like entity. And so I think that might be like a workaround. I think until we have some sort of consensus about like, these are the main chains that everyone's going to use forevermore, I think it's a little too early to know. But between some of the scaling solutions and then hopefully some of that manual effort, we can get somewhere closer.
There's also going to be a lot of lower friction that comes from off-chain NFTs, which I think of as being like a personal L2. Like I might make a thing and sign it over to you, and you sign it over to somebody, and like some people along that path might check that into a chain, and it doesn't have to be all of them. And then you might be like left validating some signatures. It might not be quite as easy to validate as a chain, but that's the only way to really drop the gas prices to zero.
Awesome. I think, yeah.
I kind of want to zoom in and ask if you guys think that NFTs are, can, or will be sustainable for one-on-one artists?
The question is about NFTs and sustainability, but sustainable for what?
One-on-one artists.
Oh, for one-of-one artists. That's a super good question. That's what I make NFTs to like play with the tech so that I know what people are doing, and I end up making a lot of, just one-off things. And I don't know, right? Because if you look at the marketplace, the PFP craze was really about like being able to bandwagon onto some existing awareness and whatnot. There's gonna be anytime you do a collection, then you're gonna be able to kind of like do that motion and people understand what it is and they're getting in the club or something. I think for one-offs, it's gonna be like the gallery scene. There's going to be curators, and right, buyers are going to want to look at more than one thing, and maybe they'll come in via an artist, but that'll be like the artists, based on their reputation, or like, I don't know, like I buy NFTs from the people who are pushing forward, like, AI art generation or whatever. But if you're making really good art, I think it's not going to make it easier to get the audience, right?
I think it. Well, I was just going to say, I think it combines a little bit with other trends. Like, so I agree it's going to be a little bit more like the gallery scene. I think the main difference is, unlike the gallery scene, there won't be gatekeepers to it. And so if you're an artist and you're creating your own following on Twitter, Instagram, wherever, hopefully there will be alternatives and more of those that come up. Like, it's just a way that you can engage with the base of people who care about the things that you're creating. And so I think thinking of the scarcity aspect of it, just as a part of like, how do you enable some of like the social value capture that can happen? And I think the cool part about NFTs is it's like private ownership for public consumption. And so it still gives you a way. And I think RAC had a really good set of tweets about how he's made more money selling NFTs than he's ever made streaming music, because like there's a handful, a very small sliver of like very, very like eager buyers in his fan base who are willing to like give him capital so he can continue pursuing his work. And I think to me, that's like hopefully the goal for most of arts, where you can have like some patrons that really want to help support. And it doesn't have to be like an individual patron. It could be a DAO. It could be many things. But I think that's how that evolves. And really, the cool thing here is all these platforms are open. So if you're trying to build that following, it's still possible to do it. You'll like meet other artists. You can like collaborate with them. But I think it's less about like you now have to go through specific social hurdles to like make it into like the 5 galleries that matter in New York or whatever else.
There will be, I think, assuming you get the promotion right and people are buying your stuff, the artists I know who have been in NFTs for a while, it's the residual royalty splits that's different from their other income. And for them, it's not even necessarily a ton of money. It's just, wow, cool, I forgot I made that painting and somebody bought it, So it's a good connection for artists to have with their work.